Welcome back. Ready to dive into today's news?
Definitely a lot to unpack today.
Yeah, California wildfires, Trump's back in the news, and we'll even touch on some, climate change stuff.
Should be an interesting deep dive.
Well, let's start with those wildfires out in L.A. Both the L.A. Times and the New York Times have some pretty alarming reports.
Yeah, the destruction is really devastating, and it's really concerning when you look at the impact on the local wildlife.
Oh, absolutely. The L.A. Times actually had this article about how more than 750 endangered tidewater gobies had to be rescued.
Yeah, from like a Malibu lagoon that was completely scorched by the Palisades fire. These fires, they just wipe out entire ecosystems.
It's crazy. And the same article mentions all the hiking trails that are closed now in the Santa Monica Mountains because of fire damage.
Yeah, it's impacting everything. Tourism, recreation, you name it.
And, it goes beyond just the immediate damage, too, right? NPR actually has a story about a climate scientist named Ben Hamilton.
Oh, wow. Yeah, his home was destroyed in the Eaton Canyon fire.
It's just a stark reminder that climate change is hitting close to home now.
Literally.
And rebuilding after these fires, that's a whole other challenge.
Absolutely. The LA Times actually compared the rebuilding efforts in LA now to what happened after the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa back in 2017.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, so after that fire, Santa Rosa adopted stricter building codes. They really started focusing on fire-resistant materials.
Makes sense, but is LA going to follow suit? I mean,
Yeah.
they really need to learn from these past experiences.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
For sure, because we can't keep rebuilding the same way and expecting different results, right?
Right.
But rebuilding also brings up a whole other concern, air quality.
Yeah, there's an article in the Daily Climate that talks about all the toxic chemicals that get released into the air during these fires.
And those pollutants can travel way beyond the fire zone, impacting people's health miles away.
Definitely. And Inside Climate News had this article. It was about how some residents in Colorado were pushing back against new energy-efficient building codes. Yeah, after the Marshall Fire in 2021, they were arguing that these new codes would make rebuilding way too expensive.
So it's like you want to be environmentally conscious, but you also have to be realistic about the cost, right?
Exactly. It's a tough balance. And speaking of tough situations, the Washington Post brought up this whole other challenge: damaged EV batteries.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
As we're moving towards all these electric vehicles, we need to consider how we're going to deal with these batteries when they get damaged in fires.
It's a whole other layer of complexity when it comes to wildfire recovery.
Definitely, it's like this ripple effect that we didn't even think about before.
Totally. And speaking of unexpected consequences, let's shift gears a bit and talk about former President Trump.
Oh, yeah, he's back. The New York Times and the Daily Climate have been reporting on his new executive orders.
His so-called energy revolution, right?
He's claiming we need to prioritize oil, gas, coal, and uranium to make sure we have energy security.
But he's completely ignoring renewable energy, like solar and wind.
Yeah, which has unsurprisingly sparked some controversy.
For sure, E&E News says Republicans are largely on board with his moves.
But the Democrats, not so much. They're worried about the environmental impact.
So the political divide continues.
Absolutely. I mean, halting federal approvals for new wind farms, revoking offshore wind leases. It's like we're taking steps backward.
I mean, the Daily Climate actually said that wind energy advocates see this as a direct attack on their industry.
They're worried about jobs, about investments, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's not a good look.
And it's not just a domestic issue either. Trump withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Agreement again. That isolates us on the global stage when it comes to climate action.
It's frustrating. It feels like we're moving away from these international efforts to address climate change. But on a more positive note, I did see that Michael Bloomberg pledged to fill the U.S. funding gap for the UN climate body.
That's good news. I mean, can private funding actually compensate for government inaction, though?
It's a big question.
It is, but it's good to see someone stepping up.
For sure. And while the political battles rage on, the planet's sending us some pretty clear signals that things are changing.
Yeah, the Daily Climate and Vox have been reporting on this link between Arctic warming and those severe winter storms we've been seeing across the U.S.
It's wild. How can a warming Arctic lead to colder winters?
It's all about the polar vortex and the jet stream. As the Arctic warms up, it disrupts these weather patterns, which can lead to those intense cold snaps even further south.
So even though overall winters are getting milder, we can still get hit with those extreme cold events.
And they can really cause problems for areas that aren't used to that kind of weather.
It's a reminder that climate change isn't just about rising temperatures.
Right. It's about these unpredictable and extreme weather events that are becoming more and more common.
And The Guardian has been reporting on another alarming development up in the Arctic, melting permafrost.
Yeah, it's releasing huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere.
And that just contributes to even more warming, right? It's like this vicious cycle.
Exactly. It's a feedback loop that we can't afford to ignore. I mean, the carbon stored in permafrost is almost double the amount that's currently in the atmosphere.
Oh, wow. So if it keeps thawing at this rate, it's going to make things even worse.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the Arctic that's being affected, right? What about the coral reefs?
Yeah, the Great Barrier Reef is in trouble.
The Daily Climate in The Guardian had some pretty alarming reports about all the coral deaths happening there.
It's a clear sign that climate change is impacting marine ecosystems just as severely as terrestrial ones. I mean, these coral reefs, they're vital for so much biodiversity, coastal protection, fisheries.
Yeah, and their decline, it's a major threat to the health of our oceans.
Definitely. And on top of all that, the conversation brought up another challenge: global inequality.
Yeah, how does that tie into all of this?
Well, it's not just about reducing emissions. It's about making sure that the people who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are protected.
Yeah, that makes sense. The people who contributed the least to the problem are often the ones who suffer the most.
Exactly. So tackling climate change effectively, it means addressing social and economic disparities as well.
It's definitely a complex issue.
No doubt. It really is. And, it's easy to focus on these big global issues, but there are people out there making a difference. NPR has this story about an economist.
Oh, wow.
She actually survived a wildfire, and now she's trying to fix California's insurance crisis.
That's amazing, turning a personal tragedy into something positive. So what's she doing?
Well, her insurance company dropped her after the fire.
Oh, wow.
And when she started looking into it, she realized this was happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Insurers are pulling out of high-risk areas, and it's leaving homeowners with very few options.
So what can she do?
Well, she's advocating for policy changes to make insurance more affordable and accessible, especially in those fire-prone communities.
It's good to see someone taking action, making a difference. Yeah. But then you read stories like this one in the New York Times about the new temporary head of FEMA, Cameron Hamilton.
What about him?
Well, it turns out he doesn't have much experience with large-scale disasters,
Oh, that's not good.
especially with all these climate-driven disasters becoming more frequent.
We need someone who can handle that.
Exactly. It's a bit concerning.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
And the New York Times also had an article about all these industry executives.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
They're joining the EPA now, and some people are worried about conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I mean, the EPA is supposed to be protecting the environment, right?
Exactly.
So who are they really working for?
It raises some questions for sure.
Definitely. Any changes at the EPA could have a huge impact on environmental policy.
Absolutely. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. It's easy to get overwhelmed with all this news,
Yeah. Yeah, how do you stay informed without losing your mind?
Well, I try to be careful about where I get my news from.
Yeah, me too.
I look for reputable sources that actually do some in-depth analysis.
And avoid all the clickbait stuff.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just got to take a break from it all.
Oh, for sure. You got to unplug every now and then.
So out of all the news we talked about today, what stood out to you the most?
I keep thinking about that economist who's fighting the insurance crisis in California.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
It shows that you can turn adversity into action, even when things seem hopeless.
It's a good reminder that we can all make a difference.
Absolutely, whether it's advocating for policy changes or supporting organizations on the front lines.
Or even just making more sustainable choices in our own lives.
Every little bit helps.
So what does all this mean for our listener?
I think it shows just how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, climate change, environmental problems, politics, inequality.
It's all connected.
And we need to start addressing these issues now.
The time for action is now.
Yeah, it really is a lot to take in. But, it's not all bad news, right?
Definitely not. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but even small actions can make a difference.
Yeah, that's true. Like what kind of things?
Well, reducing your carbon footprint, supporting sustainable businesses, even just talking to your friends and family about these issues.
It all adds up, right?
Exactly. And it's about staying informed and holding our leaders accountable. We need policies that address climate change head on.
So you're saying just being informed is a form of action.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. The more we understand these issues, the better we can navigate them and find solutions.
I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
It really is, and we've covered a lot today, from those wildfires in California to Trump's energy policies and the Arctic and those coral reefs. It's been a lot.
But even with all that, there are those stories of hope, like that economist working on the insurance crisis.
Exactly. And the fact that we're having these conversations, that people are engaged and looking for solutions, that's a positive sign.
So to our listener, what really resonated with you today? What questions are you still thinking about?
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the news.
Keep exploring these issues. Keep asking those questions and keep the conversation going.
And remember, staying informed is the first step towards making a difference.
Until next time, keep diving deep.